Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start out with a pretty bold statement, which is social media is a serious threat to authoritarian regimes. And you wouldn't think, but this has become a pretty controversial statement. I can already hear the trolls stirring on Twitter as I say this. They will ask, if the internet is so powerful, then where's the Chinese Spring? Many will point out, rightly so, that authoritarian regimes try to control the web, and that technology can also be used for oppression. Others will say, by the way, bad people use the internet too. And to these people I say, you are absolutely right. I also don't disagree with anything that Katie said in her excellent presentation. The internet is absolutely a double-edged sword. But I come back to my original statement, which is social media poses a serious threat to authoritarian regimes. Here's why. The internet has an important psychological impact on individuals who resist state power. In authoritarian countries, ordinary citizens are often paralyzed by isolation, fear, and apathy. This prevents resistance and helps keep repressive regimes in power. Now, in large part thanks to the internet, ordinary people are overcoming these feelings. So let me start with isolation. This is a fairly simple concept. Authoritarian regimes try to isolate critics from one another. In the internet age, this is increasingly difficult to do. Take China, for example. My book, my book tells the story of the internet activist Michael Anti. Anti spoke at PDF a couple years ago. He's a very well-known Chinese internet dissident. What some people don't know about him is that he grew up fiercely loyal to the Communist Party of China. He believed what he saw on state television. And so, as I'm sure many of you saw, we just recently passed the 25th anniversary of the 1989 crackdowns in Tiananmen Square. In 1989, Anti was in China, again believing what he saw in the media, and he had no reason to doubt the official story. He thought that the Chinese army was simply acting to protect the country from violence and chaos. Fast forward 10 years to 1999. He downloaded a newsletter from an overseas dissident website. The site was blocked in China, but he used a proxy server. He found photos and accounts of the 1989 crackdown. He told me that he cried all night. He felt cold, betrayed, and completely alone. But he didn't feel like talking about it to his friends, and he didn't feel like talking about it to his parents. So he turned to the internet, where there were people who shared his views. Before going online, Anti later wrote, for 20 years, I lived in 1984. He continued to describe the night when his illusions about communism were forever broken by images that he saw online. In those moments, he wrote, everything was destroyed. My dreams about my country and my society were all destroyed. Today, Anti enjoys a vibrant online universe in what is essentially a one-party state. Most important, on the internet, a dissident knows who is on his side. That's why when Anti learned about Tiananmen, he turned to netizens before anyone else. On the internet, he knew that he was not alone. For a dissident in China, this can be a life-changing realization. After those 1989 demonstrations, Beijing said, this is not going to happen again. The Chinese government is famously nervous about mass gatherings. Even this gathering would make the Chinese government nervous. That's why the internet is so important in China. It is a platform for virtual assembly. And so the title of this book comes from a conversation that I had with Anti 10 years ago. And I asked him, why does the internet matter in China? And he said, because now I know who my comrades are. So now I want to talk about fear, which is another powerful weapon of authoritarian regimes. My book also looks at Cuba and tells the story of a Cuban blogger named Laritza, and I will tweet out everybody's Twitter handles after this, who wrote a blog because she wanted to tell stories that couldn't be found in Cuba's state media. Laritza, born in 1980, did not intend to be a dissident. She was not born to be a dissident. She wanted to be a lawyer. But even after graduating with a degree in law, she found that her wages were not enough to support her and her family. She also felt that the laws that she learned about in school were not being upheld, and worse, most Cubans were not even aware of their basic rights. What frustrated her the most, however, was the fact that she couldn't really talk about this publicly, nor could she read about these problems in Cuban newspapers. So Laritza took her frustration to the one platform where she felt she could express herself: the internet. In today's interconnected world, Cuba's internet penetration is stunningly low. Most people don't have internet access at home, and using the internet at a hotel can be prohibitively expensive. Nor is it easy to be a critical blogger in Cuba. After her name first appeared on the web, Laritza said, Cuban authorities began studying her as if she were a laboratory rat. She believed that state security made contact with her friends, her family, her former classmates, basically anyone. In Cuba, which has a large network of citizen informers, one of the phrases you'll often hear is, "You never know who is who." For a dissident blogger, this feeling of paranoia was magnified exponentially. Laritza saw agents and informers everywhere. Yet, even as this pressure increased, something strange happened. Laritza felt more liberated than ever. She was no longer a passive object of surveillance photos. She had a voice. In a country where officials control the narrative, she was able to tell the story of her Cuba, her life as she lived and breathed it. And yes, Cubans do not have a lot of internet access, but she had a network of international followers. I want to note here that it's relevant that she was not an anonymous blogger, and many Cubans are not. They post their photos and their names online. That means that people outside of Cuba know who they are. It is a lot harder for authorities to make troublemakers disappear. Most important, for Laritza, the internet gave her the opportunity to express herself. She wrote about economic hardships, injustice, and she wrote about the law. Expressing herself freely on her blog was a transformative experience. She overcame the fear that had once paralyzed her. So even as she maneuvered her way through constant surveillance and quiet intimidation, Laritza described herself as free. Now I want to talk about apathy, which is an authoritarian government, or maybe any government's, best protection. Take Russia. As recently as a few years ago, there wasn't serious internet censorship in Russia. The Kremlin didn't need to censor the web because the web wasn't a serious threat to its power. Russia was plagued by apathy. Most Russians believed they had no effect on their political process. The internet, simply by existing, is not going to change this reality. Hardly anyone showed up to opposition protests. This meant that it was very easy for police to round up the few protesters and take them away. It became a vicious cycle. People were afraid of being arrested at protests and figured protests wouldn't change anything anyway. So they stayed home. The internet became a powerful tool for fighting apathy in Russia. Take Alexei Navalny, who is now one of Russia's most prominent opposition figures. But not so long ago, he wasn't very well known at all. Navalny, as some of you know, fairly recently was placed under house arrest and tellingly barred from the internet. He rose to fame on his blog. A commercial lawyer and shareholder activist, Navalny used his blog to launch campaigns against specific corporations that he suspected of corruption. Navalny understood early that he was trying to get a weary, cynical population to rally for change. You have to propose to people the comfortable way of struggle, he told me in 2010. In other words, now is not the time to call Russians into the streets. It would be far more practical to say, please, just fill out this online form. And that's exactly what Navalny did. Encouraging lazy, non-committal internet activism, which many of us derisively refer to as slacktivism, was all part of Navalny's master plan. In the past, he said, people demonstrated constantly and failed to see improvements. He wanted to show Russians that they could fight corruption from the convenience of their living rooms, and that they could win. Navalny proposed this comfortable way of struggle by calling on readers of his blog to write to authorities and demand that they investigate alleged corruption. He launched a site to crowdsource scrutiny over Russian government tenders. Navalny's anti-corruption efforts led to the annulment of suspicious government contracts worth millions of dollars. He waged years of these online campaigns, and he sometimes got results. Maybe a criminal investigation would be reopened, maybe an official would resign, maybe just a pothole would get fixed. But most important, Navalny showed ordinary Russians that they could make a difference. He took a powerful swipe at the apathy that had become the Kremlin's best protection. Now, as I'm sure many of you have noticed, Russia is cracking down hard on online dissent. But the Kremlin is cracking down on the internet precisely because Russian authorities finally understand that the internet can pose a political threat. This realization hit home in late 2011 and early 2012, when tens of thousands of Russians took to the streets. Social media played a role in organizing these protests, but that wasn't its most important function. On platforms like Facebook, Russians could see thousands of people showing their support for the demonstrations. Of course, a Facebook like is not the same thing as on-the-ground participation. But seeing tens of thousands of people expressing virtual protest had an important psychological effect. It helped assure individuals that if they went to the streets to protest, they would not be alone. Isolation, fear, and apathy have long been the most effective weapons of authoritarian regimes. Now, the internet is helping ordinary people transcend these obstacles. The question is, what's next? Revolution is not necessarily the answer. Revolutions need a spark, such as a political or economic crisis. Social media alone will not light that spark, nor do revolutions always yield clean results. As we saw in Egypt, for example, mass uprisings that are organized online tend to be leaderless and decentralized. Leaderless revolutions can yield a great deal of chaos if a revolution succeeds. That's because leaderless revolutions, as the term suggests, have no leaders. The good news is that the internet can help transform a country, even without a revolution. The internet has already changed China, for example, by providing a previously unimaginable forum for speech, information, and virtual assembly. So again, I'm not here to downplay government's repression of the web. But what I do want to say is that the internet is helping to create a new kind of citizen. These citizens are networked, unafraid, and ready for action. And no, social media on its own is not enough to build new governance structures. There is a lot more work in capacity building. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, and Zeynep, I'm sure, will explain this quite well. But what I do want to say is that the internet is helping ordinary people overcome the isolation, fear, and apathy that are the lifeblood of authoritarian regimes. Thank you.